approach went too far. A policy directive in 2003 called the Customer Service Initiative identified the airlines as the FAA's customers and encouraged the industry to challenge the decisions of FAA inspectors.
The problem, though, with the Customer Service Initiative, the way it was pushed, the way it was implemented, the way it was communicated to the workforce, it sent the wrong message. It sent a very bad message to the industry. It sent the message that, look, I can cut a deal. And all you had to do was make a phone call to, somebody that you became friends with over the years and request reconsideration, and it would be taken care of. I can cut a deal. And all you had to do was make a phone call to, somebody that you became friends with over the years and request reconsideration, and it would be taken care of. I can cut a deal. And all you had to do was make a phone call to, somebody that you became friends with over the years and request reconsideration, and it would be taken care of. I can cut a deal. And all you had to do was make a phone call to, somebody that you became friends with over the years and request reconsideration, and it would be taken care of.
Both the FAA and industry say their success working together is borne out by statistics that flying today is safer than ever. Prior to the crash of 3407, it had been 2.5 years since the last fatal commercial airline accident in the U.S.
In those intervening years, the United States air transportation system transported 2 billion people, maybe a little bit more. That is the equivalent of having transported the population of the United States more than 6 times without putting a scratch on anybody.
But in the airline industry, there's a common expression that the absence of accidents doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. When people say that, what do they mean?
What you really have to look at are the thousands of things that lead up to the accident in the first place. The thousands of things that lead up to the accident in the first place. The thousands of things that lead up to the accident in the first place. The thousands of things that lead up to the accident in the first place. Human beings will make a lot of little mistakes that serve as a warning before a big mistake occurs and a big consequence. Human beings will make a lot of little mistakes that serve as a warning before a big mistake occurs and a big consequence. Human beings will make a lot of little mistakes that serve as a warning before a big mistake occurs and a big consequence. Human beings will make a lot of little mistakes that serve as a warning before a big mistake occurs and a big consequence. So what it means to really be safe is to be focused on those little warning signs and catching them early. Focused on those little warning signs and catching them early. Focused on those little warning signs and catching them early. It's only when we miss a bunch of those warning signs that we have a tragedy. It's only when we miss a bunch of those warning signs that we have a tragedy. It's only when we miss a bunch of those warning signs that we have a tragedy.
The question in the wake of 3407 is whether the FAA missed warning signs about safety problems at Colgan Air. As early as 1998, Colgan's problems were evident when the company began to grow as a regional airline. Colgan was supposed to upgrade its operations to meet the same level of safety as the major airlines. But in a letter from Colgan to the FAA obtained by Frontline, the company acknowledged it had to make significant improvements in order to meet the more stringent safety standards known as Part 121 regulations. The company committed to making substantial changes in pilot training, record keeping, management, maintenance, and safety audit systems. The letter was signed by company founder Chuck Colgan. But 7 years later, in 2005, Colgan was still not meeting its regulatory requirements, says Chris Monteleone, who was a lead FAA inspector overseeing Colgan's growing operations.
There were not enough managers. There were not enough check airmen. There were not enough maintenance personnel.
Were they just overwhelmed?
They were acting as if they were overwhelmed. They couldn't control their business. The safety part of their business. They were acting as if they were overwhelmed. They couldn't control their business. The safety part of their business. They were acting as if they were overwhelmed. They couldn't control their business. The safety part of their business.
Monteleone says he took his concerns about Colgan to his office manager at the FAA, recommending enforcement actions against the company. But his manager, he says, was getting pushback from company president Mike Colgan.
Mike Colgan would call, or in some cases it got to the point where he wrote about me to the office manager. And the office manager one time told my team, he said, Mike Colgan is a friend of this office. And that was the message. I mean, it was like, well, we already knew it, but he felt the need to reinforce it.
Did you, in the course of that, feel pressure not to stop that growth? In other words,
absolutely.
Were you seen as a roadblock?
Oh, absolutely.
The FAA office manager says he does not recall making those statements. But 3 years later, there were still problems when Colgan got another big contract from Continental. Colgan began flying a new airplane called the Q400, the type of plane that would crash in Buffalo. Did you get the sense that everybody was a bit overwhelmed by this airplane?
Yes, because there was a lot of growth. It was almost the same thing that was faced with the 2005 expansion, with this 2008 expansion of the Qs. There was a lot of growth. A lot of growing pains suffered by the company, as well as the crews, because it was new to all of us. None of us had ever operated this airplane before.
In February 2008, Colgan began flying passengers on the Q400. But the FAA was soon concerned that Colgan pilots were having trouble flying the airplane. There were reports that pilots were exercising poor judgment. And Colgan was short on check airmen, or supervisory pilots, for its Q400 fleet. So I guess were you a little surprised when they came to you and said, we want you to fly and supervise this crew?
Very surprised.
Why was that?
Because I'm not type rated in the aircraft. I'm not qualified in the aircraft. I had never flown the aircraft, and I didn't even know what the limitations of the aircraft were. Let alone it was very unclear as to exactly what we were supposed to be doing.
So did you have the sense you just wanted a warm body in that seat?
Yes.
There were other warnings about the safety culture at Colgan in 2008. In this NTSB file, we found a case that alarmed the FAA. It involved the actions of a Colgan captain on a flight out of New York City. The first officer on the flight was Ben Coates. It was Coates' job to calculate the weight limit on the flight, and his calculations showed the plane would be too heavy to fly. And you say to the captain, Captain, we're even more overweight than we thought. What do you say?
Well, he said, well, why don't we just count 3 of those adults as children?
Really?
You know, just mark them down on the sheet as children, and that'll put us underweight. That's what he suggested.
Coates says he refused, and the captain took the weight manifest from him. Only after landing did Coates discover what had happened with the manifest. So when you looked at the paperwork, which had all the information on the weights and balances for the plane, what did you see?
Well, I saw it had been altered. My math had been altered. It had been changed so that our plane would no longer be overweight.
He made the limit higher so the plane would fit.
Yes.
And what you ended up with was a very heavy aircraft.
Yes, a very hard to fly, hard to climb at least airplane.
Unsafe, illegal airplane.
Yes.
Dangerous.
Yes.
Very dangerous, actually.
Very dangerous.
Coates felt it was so dangerous that he filed a complaint with the FAA. The case landed on the desk of the agency's top regional attorney, Loretta Alcalay.
They were shocking allegations of violations by an airline captain, falsifying a load manifest to indicate that there were fewer passengers than there actually were, and flying over gross. So it was a pretty outrageous case.
Based on its investigation, the FAA revoked the captain's license.
And I think the biggest issue really is, what did Colgan do? I mean, what did Colgan do when we revoked one of their pilots? I mean, that's really the question. What did they do? I mean, you would think that they had done a top-to-bottom review about what was going on.
But what Colgan did surprised Alcalay. The company testified at an appeal hearing in support of the captain. And DeBennis, Director of Operations.
Yes.
Testifies that you're a problem, right?
I think he did, yeah.
And the captain?
Model pilot.
Whose model?
I don't know. Not my model. But apparently Colgan's model, according to the Director of Operations. And he said that under oath in an NTSB hearing. Which raises the question in my mind, how come Colgan isn't under investigation? Why do they still have an air carrier certificate? And especially if their Director of Operations is, you know, officially supporting an unsafe captain and not supporting a first officer who's trying to scream safety, especially if their Director of Operations is, you know, officially supporting an unsafe captain and not supporting a first officer who's trying to scream safety, especially if their Director of Operations is, you know, officially supporting an unsafe captain and not supporting a first officer who's trying to scream safety.